to Inhabit, and we've been in our group time talking about kind of the nuts and bolts and the science of habits and how we form habits in our lives, so that when we get into the next series and the next one and the next one about these formational habits, we'll be equipped with how to do it. And so last week we talked about the first law of making a habit is to make it obvious, and a cue to trigger you, like, oh yeah. And then this week we're diving into the second law, which is to make it attractive.
Right. Which again kind of plays into the way that a habit cycles, right? And so there's a craving that comes after the cue.
Yes.
There's something attractive, something appealing about it. And there is something true, we alluded to this, I think, in last week's video a little bit, that sometimes our spiritual formational habits, as important and crucial as they are, actually produce the most fruitful things in our lives. They're not as instantaneously attractive all the time, right? This is what makes them some of the most challenging habits to form, and why we struggle so often really with these kind of disciplines in our lives. Even those of us who have followed Jesus maybe for a long time battle making certain things habitual.
Yeah. So there's several ways that you can help make a habit more attractive while you're getting into it, you know, and before you experience the reward and the richness of it. There's some tips and tricks for that that book, again, Atomic Habits, that we're kind of leaning into some of that material this month. But you know, you can find a lot more about that, but we wanted to pick one of the tips and tricks that's kind of in that section of that book and talk about it here, because it is really a core principle of, a core value of Christianity from the beginning. And that is like getting in a community with other believers that make those things attractive, because we're all in it together. Right.
And so what's interesting, again, with spiritual habits is we really need a spiritually focused community, because the reality is that the culture around us is not going to celebrate or conform to the pattern of Jesus. In fact, that's our passage, one of our references today, both in the message as well as here in groups, is Romans 12. This idea of not being conformed to the patterns of this world, but being transformed by the renewing of our mind. There's really a gravitational pull in the world to different rhythms, different habits, different ways of thinking and ordering our lives. And so there's a sense in which we need an alternative community in order to do something different.
Yes, that's pulling us in a right direction, because we are pulled by the communities that we're in, and it's really amazing how that works. In fact, that book, Atomic Habits, gives an illustration of just how powerful that urge is to conform to whatever group that we're in. And you've got a handout today that says conforming to social norms, and it's actually an illustration that they mention in that Atomic Habits book, where they did an experiment, and they had this group of people, and they were given a line, and then they were asked to choose which of the lines, A, B, or C, were the same length as the first line. And it was obvious what the answer was. Like, anyone can tell what the answer is. But they had planted people to give a wrong answer, like adamantly, just like, no, it's it's B, and they're like really arguing, and they said like a high percentage of people went along with it, even though they knew that it wasn't right. And they came to this consensus that the line was the same length when it wasn't. And it was plain to see that it wasn't. And that just speaks to the power of deception that we see in our culture all the time. Absolutely. Where people believe lies that are just ridiculous.
This will make you content. This will fulfill you. This will fulfill. And so what do? Oh, maybe that will fulfill me. When there's a line, so to speak, in a standard that Jesus models for us, says, no, this is actually the way to know contentment, to know fulfillment in this life. And so we need a community that helps make that way of living attractive. That makes
spurs us on.
Yeah, pursuing a countercultural way of life more attractive, more appealing. So that's, the second reference here that we see is in Hebrews 10, this admonition, of do not forsake the gathering with that community, all the more as you see the day approaching, which is really a way of saying as you see the last day approaching, the return of Jesus drawing near, especially in light of that sense of urgency. Be with people who will encourage you, which literally is to put courage in you to live the way of Jesus, to spur you on toward love and good deeds.
Yep. So that's how we form these habits in our lives. We not only make it obvious, but we make it attractive. And one of those ways is to get in a group. I experienced this a little bit in my life at one point when I was trying to change the way that I was eating. And I started watching these videos that were talking about kind of low-carb lifestyle stuff. And I got kind of into it. And so I don't know if any of you have had this experience of being sucked in by YouTube. I kind of got sucked into like all these different YouTube creators that were talking about diet and talking about this way of eating. And then also around the same time, my parents started eating in this kind of general way. And so all of a sudden I had this community that, even though some of them were YouTube people that I'll never meet, but I was listening to voices that were saying, this is right, this is good, this is what's true about food and about the way it affects your body. And all of a sudden it felt normal to me to some degree. I mean, it still didn't feel normal when I went to the grocery store and couldn't find what I was looking for, but it helped it feel acceptable, and it helped me step out and change the way I was eating when I probably wouldn't have had the strength to just totally on my own without feeling like, okay, there's some other people doing this. I'm not crazy,
That's good.
So it's the same for us.
It's absolutely true. And so we put this here at this foundational part of the series to say, this, again, all of these principles are things we'll anchor back to with specific habits over the next several months. But one of the keys here is that as you're already in a group right now, if you're watching this, you're in a group. Yep. This is key to really allowing these habits to be formed out in our lives, because there's a sense of accountability, but really there's a sense of attractiveness in walking through this with other people.
And it's one of the reasons why we've promoted our groups so heavily and asked people to engage with these groups again and recommit to being a part of a group, because as we go through this series and talking about these different formational habits, we're going to be asking each of our groups to own a habit that they're going to work on together. And it's going to be an opportunity for you to feel like, this is not weird stuff. We're doing this together. This is attractive because I'm part of a group that wants to be more like Jesus. And so we're doing these things together. And I think it could be really powerful for your lives.
Absolutely.
There's a flip side of this we try to talk about each week, in case you're dealing with a bad habit you're trying to get rid of, because this science of habits works both ways. And so just like last week, we talked about how make it obvious can be switched to make it invisible to get rid of a bad habit. This one can work this way too, make it unattractive, right? And for specifically when we talk about the groups of people that we're in, it might be changing a set of friends, or changing the voices you're listening to, or like maybe you're listening to the wrong YouTube people, and what voices are you listening to that are normalizing something that's not healthy?
That's good.
Something, food for thought as we dive into discussion this morning.